When a child disappears, the story never truly ends. Not for the police, not for the world, and certainly not for the parents left standing in the wreckage. In the Australian Outback, the search for 4-year-old Gus Lamont gripped a nation, but long after the helicopters stopped circling and the cameras moved on, one detail refused to fade: the silence that followed. Two parents, two different faces of grief. One story that the public still can't quite understand. Why did their voices grow so quiet when the world needed to hear them most? What happens to love and to truth when it's buried under loss? Tonight, we revisit the case not to point fingers, but to listen to what remains unsaid. To ask why, in some stories, silence echoes louder than confession. Before we begin, take a second to do something small that truly helps independent storytelling. Hit the like button so this story reaches more eyes. Share it with someone who follows true crime. Subscribe if you want more investigations that dig beneath the headlines. And comment below. Tell us what you think and where in the world you're watching from. Because in cases like this one, every opinion, every memory, every voice might just matter. It began like any other quiet morning on Oak Park Station, a place so wide and empty that even sound seems to vanish into the heat. The Lamont family moved through their routine the way they always did. A mother preparing breakfast, a grandmother tending to chores, a child playing close by, somewhere between the house and the endless red dust. At some point in those ordinary hours, the rhythm broke. A voice called out, then another, and suddenly there was nothing. No laughter, no small footsteps, only the wind moving through the fences. What happened next would launch one of the most exhaustive searches the region had ever seen. Neighbors, police, and volunteers combed the property, hoping for even a single trace of 4-year-old Gus. Helicopters swept over the ridges. Ground teams marked grid after grid across the station's harsh terrain. Somewhere inside that chaos stood his parents. Two people caught between disbelief and terror, forced to replay the same morning over and over again. Reports describe confusion, memories that didn't always align, times that blurred. The isolation of the Outback makes every minute stretch longer, every silence feel heavier. When rescuers finally paused to rest, the sun was already falling. By then, the story had left the homestead and entered living rooms across Australia. And as the search widened, so did the questions. Who had last seen Gus? Where had everyone been when the silence fell? Those questions would follow the Lamont family long after the search teams were gone, and they still hover over the case today. In the early days, the only version of events the public could cling to came from Gus's mother, Jessica. She described the day with trembling detail, how her son had been playing nearby, how she turned her back for what she thought was only a moment, how suddenly he was gone. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her eyes red and distant. For many, her pain was undeniable, the raw ache of a mother living a nightmare no parent should ever face. But for others, something about her words felt uneven. Maybe it was the way her timeline shifted slightly each time she recalled it, or how certain moments, the ones between sight and disappearance, remained clouded, uncertain, blurred by shock, or guilt, or something deeper. Trauma can twist memory. Psychologists know that. It fractures time and bends reality, leaving gaps where truth should live. But in cases like this, the world rarely grants compassion for confusion. It demands precision. It wants answers, not emotions. Jessica's interviews became the subject of endless debate. Her tone, too calm, some said. Her pauses, too long. Her phrases, rehearsed, almost protective, as though she were choosing which truths to share and which to keep buried. Yet behind every word was a woman drowning in public scrutiny, one who perhaps didn't even know what to believe anymore. In the days that followed, she stepped away from the spotlight. No more cameras, no more statements. Her silence became its own message, one the world has been trying to interpret ever since. Was it exhaustion, fear, or something else? A truth she couldn't bring herself to speak aloud. While Jessica's face appeared in early interviews, another figure stayed almost entirely in the background: Gus's father, Joshua. His name surfaced in reports, mentioned quietly as part of the family, but his presence, absent. No press conferences, no public statements, not even a brief comment to confirm what he believed might have happened to his son. At first, the public assumed it was grief, a man too broken to speak, But as weeks turned into months, the silence began to feel heavier. People started asking questions. Where was he on that day? Why hadn't he stepped forward? And was his distance an act of pain, or something else entirely? The truth is, silence carries its own tone. It can scream guilt, it can whisper heartbreak, it can mean everything, or absolutely nothing at all. In the case of Joshua Lamont, that silence became a canvas for speculation. Some believed he was avoiding the cameras out of fear of being misunderstood. Others thought he simply couldn't relive the moment, not even once. But every story needs a voice, and his remained missing. Reporters searched for him. They wanted to hear his side, his memory, his truth. None came, and in that void, the story began to reshape itself. Two parents, two very different responses to the same tragedy. One spoke, perhaps too much. The other, not at all. Together, they became the embodiment of contradiction. Grief split in half, each side reflecting what the other refused to show. The question that lingers isn't why Joshua stayed silent. It's what that silence might be trying to protect. In tragedies like this, grief doesn't always unite. Sometimes, it fractures what's left. Those who knew the Lamonts say the air around them changed after Gus vanished. Once they were a young family trying to rebuild, to find normalcy amid the vast quiet of the Outback. After that day, even standing in the same room seemed harder. Jessica's sorrow lived on the surface, visible, tremoring, raw. Joshua's stayed buried, private and distant. For outsiders, it looked like a rift. But inside grief, that's often how love survives. By shutting the world out, by holding pain where no one else can see it. Still, the contrast fed curiosity. The public began asking, if two people shared the same loss, why did their stories sound so different? Jessica had spoken of the search, of hope, of disbelief. Joshua, even through others, said little about the day itself. It wasn't long before speculation crept in. Talk of tension, quiet disagreements, emotional distance, not proof, not accusation. Just the inevitable human tendency to look for cause, where there may only be coincidence. Every relationship carries its own history, every marriage, its own unspoken weight. And in a family already living under the vast, isolating sky of rural Australia, that weight only grows heavier when tragedy arrives. The Lamonts, like the land around them, seemed to harden under the sun, cracked on the surface, hiding what lay beneath. Whether their silence was born of guilt, grief, or exhaustion, no one can truly say. But one truth lingered long after the reporters left. Sometimes the greatest distance isn't measured in miles. It's the space between two people who once shared everything, and now share only loss. Long after the search ended, Oak Park Station remained a place heavy with silence. The red earth, once alive with search teams and camera crews, returned to its natural stillness, vast, windswept, and eerily calm. To an outsider, it looks like peace. To those who knew what happened there, it feels like something else, a reminder that every rock, every stretch of dry grass, has been walked by people desperate for answers that never came. The Lamont family still had to live there. The same fences, the same house, the same endless horizon, all carrying the memory of that morning. Imagine waking each day and seeing the last place your child was ever seen. For Jessica, that might have been unbearable. For Joshua, perhaps it was easier to stay away. People close to the family said the atmosphere grew tense. Small things, an argument, a silence, a look, took on new meaning. Because grief doesn't just haunt the heart, it clings to the walls, to the air itself. And the property, so isolated and unforgiving, became a mirror of that grief. A place where questions whispered louder than words. Some locals said it never felt the same again. Nights seemed darker, the land quieter, as if the desert itself knew something no one could explain. In the distance, where searchlights once swept the ground, the sand still shifts with the wind, erasing footprints, blurring the past. The only thing that remains constant is the feeling that something happened here, something the land remembers, even if the people can't say it aloud. When Gus's story first broke, it wasn't just another missing child case. It was a mystery that pulled the entire country, and soon the world, into its orbit. Photos of a smiling, sandy-haired boy, standing beside his family, spread across social media feeds, accompanied by the same haunting caption, "Missing in the Outback." Within hours, news networks from Sydney to London ran the story. Online forums lit up with theories, speculation, and suspicion. But the attention was a double-edged sword. On one side, thousands of strangers poured their hearts into the search, offering help, sharing updates, praying for a miracle. On the other, came judgment, harsh comments about the parents, unverified claims about the grandmother, and endless debates over who looked too calm, who wasn't crying enough, and who knew more than they were saying. It became less about finding Gus, and more about finding someone to blame. The Lamont family, already crushed under grief, now faced an invisible courtroom, one that never rests, and never forgives. Still, amid the noise, there was something undeniable. The public's fascination wasn't born from cruelty alone. It came from confusion, from the sense that the story didn't fit. A child vanishes without a trace, in broad daylight, in a place too open to hide anyone. A search that covers hundreds of square kilometers yields nothing, and a family's account that feels incomplete. Every viewer, every listener, found themselves asking the same silent question: what aren't we being told? That question, more than anything, is what kept the world watching, long after the headlines faded. Every investigation ends with paperwork, reports filed, statements logged, and conclusions drawn. But in Gus Lamont's case, the paperwork feels more like a pause than an ending, because so much still doesn't add up. The timeline, for one. How long was Gus truly out of sight before anyone noticed? Early reports said minutes. Others suggested half an hour. In a landscape as open and silent as the Australian outback, those are not small discrepancies. They are the difference between tragedy and cover-up. Then there's the search. Hundreds of trained eyes, dozens of vehicles, helicopters, drones, all scanning a flat expanse of red dirt and brush. Yet not a single trace, not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not even a scent trail. How does a child vanish into nothing, in a place where there's nowhere to hide? And what about the statements that changed, subtly, but noticeably, in the days that followed? What was said to the press? What was said to police? And what was not said at all? Those inconsistencies are what fuel the whispers, that maybe the story the public heard wasn't the whole story, that maybe, within that family, there's a truth being guarded, not out of malice, but out of something harder to name: guilt, fear, shame, or protection. Because sometimes, the people closest to the truth are the ones who feel least able to speak it. And so the case remains open, not officially, but emotionally. The world might move on, but questions like these, they linger, in living rooms, in news archives, and most of all, in the minds of those who watched this story unfold, and thought something here just doesn't make sense. Every mystery reaches a point where facts stop, and speculation begins. And in the Gus Lamont case, that line has been blurred since the very beginning. The official version tells of a simple, tragic accident. A child wanders off, in the harsh outback terrain, lost, disoriented, overtaken by the elements. But when every search, every tracker, every dog fails to find a trace, people begin asking darker questions. What if Gus didn't wander off? What if he was taken, not by a stranger, but by someone he knew? A theory no one wants to say aloud, yet it lingers everywhere. In online forums, in whispered conversations, the suggestion that maybe, just maybe, someone in that small family circle knows more than they've said. The mother's grief felt pure, but her words, some say they sound rehearsed. The father's silence, protective, perhaps, or calculated. And then there's the grandmother, the woman who first drew sympathy from the nation, and then suspicion. Her interviews carried a strange tone, warmth and calm, where most would show trembling devastation. She spoke of closure, when others were still begging for hope. And most chilling of all, she slipped once, according to some watchers, using the past tense, before correcting herself. He was such a bright boy, she said softly. Maybe just grief, maybe something else. Because grief, after all, can reveal or it can disguise. And if she does know what really happened, then maybe this entire story, the search, the sorrow, the silence, has been a performance for the rest of us. The hardest part, we'll likely never know, because every family secret, especially one born from tragedy, has its own defense mechanism: denial. And denial is the perfect alibi. As the dust settled and the headlines faded, one truth became unavoidable. The disappearance of Gus Lamont isn't just a story about a missing boy. It's a story about silence. Silence from a mother whose grief feels both raw and rehearsed. Silence from a father who seems trapped between denial and distance. And silence from a grandmother who, despite her composure, speaks like someone who's already made peace with something we haven't yet uncovered. The police have never charged anyone. There's no evidence of foul play, no proof of abduction, but absence itself, of evidence, of explanation, of truth, is its own kind of evidence. Something happened that day, something that changed every person on that property forever. And maybe the question isn't who took Gus, but who lost him. Because there's a difference between a disappearance caused by chance and one caused by choice. As we sift through the layers, the interviews, the inconsistencies, the public sympathy turns suspicion, a darker possibility forms that this wasn't just a random tragedy in the Outback, that maybe Gus's final moments were witnessed by the very people who now carry the burden of pretending they weren't. No cameras, no confession, no closure, just a story that refuses to end, because it was never fully told. And so we're left with one final question, the one no one in Oak Park Station dares to ask aloud. If the truth was sitting right there at the family table all along, how far would someone go to keep it buried beneath the desert sand? Until that answer comes, if it ever does, Gus Lamont's name will echo not as a case solved, but as a mystery half told. And the silence that surrounds it, maybe that silence is the confession. Somewhere in the stillness of the Australian outback, the truth about Gus Lamont remains buried. Maybe beneath the dust, maybe beneath a lie, or maybe inside the hearts of those who have chosen never to speak it aloud. Because when a child vanishes, the story doesn't just end with the search. It lives on in the eyes of everyone left behind. And sometimes the silence that follows says more than any statement ever could. The world may have moved on, but people still whisper about the Lamonts, about the interviews, the tears, the tone, and the words that didn't quite fit. Was it sorrow or guilt? Was it grief or something rehearsed? Whatever the truth is, it's still out there, waiting to be uncovered. And one day, when the silence finally breaks, we might see who's been protecting what all along. Until then, this case remains an echo, one that keeps asking, what really happened to little Gus Lamont? If you've watched this far, it means you care about the truth, not just the headlines. So please, take a moment to like this video, share it, and subscribe if you want to keep uncovering stories that others are too afraid to question. Tell me what you think happened that day, and where you're watching from, in the comments below. Do you believe this was a tragic accident? Or is there something the Lamonts don't want the world to know? Your opinion matters, because sometimes it's the public that forces the truth to surface. Until next time, stay curious, stay alert, and remember, not every mystery hides in the dark. Some are standing right in the sunlight, waiting for someone brave enough to see them.